Thanks, Cindy.
Okay, you're welcome. Here we go.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Learning and Mending Post-Human Infrastructure. While we all get settled into our squares, I thought I'd start out with our embroidery of the week. And this one is a special one for many, many, many reasons. It's the only one actually that we have of this pattern. And it's charming as well because Martha Willem also kind of went a little creative outside the pattern. But what we have tonight is a bat embroidery. If you can see the detail, let me see if I can get it closer. But what I thought was so perfect about this embroidery is because we're talking about sound, and bats use sound to echolocate. And so I thought this was just perfect for tonight's embroidery of the week. So what we're going to do now, it seems like we're all getting settled in and no one new is joining at the moment. We're going to start off with some popcorn introductions. So I'll start. And what we do is generally say our name, our pronouns, where we're zooming in from, and what we're working on tonight. So I will start. I'm Jen. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm calling in from Studio City. And tonight I'm going to still be moving along with last Learning and Mending's bison and range pattern, but I'm getting there. I am going to get there before this series is over. That's my goal. But I'd like to actually get there sooner because I really want to start the corn pattern. So, which some of you have already received or will receive. If you haven't, you can request one at info@metabolicstudio.org. And I am going to pass this to Alex.
Okay, yeah, I'm calling in from Los Angeles, California. So actually Frogtown, so right next to the LA River. And I'm just working on listening and being present.
Alex, would you like to popcorn it to someone else?
Oh, sure, yeah. I will popcorn to Cynthia.
Hi, I'm Cindy. I'm calling in from West Covina, and I am going to be working on our crow embroidery. I don't think you can see it with my background, but there's a crow embroidery here that I just started. So I'm sorry, not a crow, a raven. That's what I'll be doing today. And I will pass it along to Professor Olivia.
Hey, I am Marcella. Sorry, I'll change. Yeah, I am professor. I forgot to change the tag. I teach at LA Tech. I'm a fan for a long time of the Metabolic Student Studio, and actually I've used a lot of your work in my classroom at LA Trade Tech Architecture. I run it as an atelier, and thank you, Lauren. I believe design is a human right, and I'm loving this series. I did send a request because I love the whole idea of making things. And thank you. And I will popcorn these to Alex Nordquist.
I actually went first. Do you
Oh,
you want
I'm
someone
sorry.
else?
I was trying to locate myself. Okay, I got an F as a student. I guess Maria Labourt.
Hi everyone, my name is Maria. I'm calling in from Los Feliz, and I'm also a fan of Metabolic Studio. So very happy to be here, learning from you, listening to the reads. Last time it left me with in a nice state. So yeah, I'm looking forward to be here present, and I'm popcorning to Roxanne.
Hi, everybody. I'm Roxanne. I use she, her pronouns. I am calling from the road. between Claremont and Los Angeles. And I cannot popcorn because I can't look at my phone. So maybe somebody else. Jen, could you take it and popcorn to somebody for me, please?
Sure, I will pass it to Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm in San Diego, and I'm also in Lauren's class, Post-Human Infrastructure, through the Alternative Art School. I missed the first few minutes of this, so we're popcorning introductions. Is that it? I need to pick someone? Okay, cool. All right, I hope I'm picking someone who hasn't already been chosen. Alexandra? Did you already go?
I sure enough did, but you know what? Love and the love.
Okay, how about Stefano?
Sure.
Okay.
Hi, how are you? Hi, everyone, and happy to be here as always, and excited to today's reading. Seems very, very interesting as always. And I'm gonna pass it to Yeva.
Hi, my name is Yeva. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm zooming in from Glendale, California, and I'm working on the corn, which I showed Jen. I have made some progress. So my corn progress here. And yeah, excited for today's reading. I'm gonna popcorn to Alex, the other Alex.
Hi, I'm calling from Providence, Rhode Island. I'm also in Lauren's class, Post-Human Infrastructure. I came in a little bit late, so I don't know who to popcorn it to. And I'm also a big fan of Metabolic Studio. If one can help me with popcorn.
Sure, I'll choose someone for you, Alexandra. How about,
Thank you.
sure, Michelle?
Hello, everyone. I am Michel, pronoun he, they. I'm from El Sereno and looking forward for this reading tonight. And I will ask Shelley if she's not too far from the microphone.
I'm Shelley. I'm in La Crescenta, California, she, her pronouns. And today I'm finishing the edge on a rag rug. So I love this, and it's so nice to be read to. I'll popcorn to, has Jack gone already?
No. I'm Jack. I'm at Metabolic Studio. Loved the last class. I've been describing Metabolic Studio as a biological remediation process using the last reading's terms. Excited for this reading, excited to be here with you all. I started working at Metabolic Studios, super exciting. I'll popcorn it to Matt.
So I'm Matt. I calling in from the Moon site, Metabolic Studio, located in Los Angeles. And I'm looking forward to my first learning and mending. I could not attend last week. And I'll popcorn it to. Wait, is that? I thought didn't you already go, Jen?
I did, but I'm going to take it over actually right now. And for those of you that didn't get an opportunity to introduce yourself and what you're working on, there's plenty of time later on this evening after the reading. I just want to welcome you to our 9th edition of Learning and Mending Post-Human Infrastructure. This series will explore the commons of soil, the air we breathe, water, sound, and the potency of seed and mycelium networks. It involves letting go of the outdated ideas that do not support and serve the life web. As a studio practice, we aim to facilitate this rebound and regeneration. We seek to engender self-propagating and self-generating feedback loops that feed the life web in places that have been ground down to an inert state. Artists need to create on the same scale society has the capacity to destroy. Posthumanism is a concept that critiques anthropocentrism and the philosophical branch of humanism, a dominant ethos that has shaped social relations and the way humans relate to the non-human world for centuries. There is a rich discourse on post-human and posthumanism. Therefore, there are many ways one might define these concepts. Posthumanism pushes back against the centering of the human and moves towards a thinking that eradicates hierarchy of being and challenges the life, non-life binary. Posthumanism is an ontological pursuit of what it means to be human, what it means to be non-human, and where these categories rupture and collide. This is a 7-week series and will be facilitated by Millie Mason Moore, Metabolic Studios Lab Coordinator. We are inspired generalists rather than experts and hope to facilitate an open community dialogue. This series will run each Tuesday, the exception of skipping November 8th, and conclude on November 14th. As I mentioned, if you'd like to receive an embroidery kit, please send us your name and mailing address to info@metabolicstudio.org. And we'll also put that in the chat bar. Tonight, we will share our screen displaying this week's reading. Feel free to jump in and read aloud from the text as you feel inspired, as we welcome one and all to both listen and give voice to the unique text we share each week. And now I'll pass it over to Lauren.
Hi, everybody. So now we move into the reading section of our evening, and I invite you to get really comfortable in your seat, center yourself, and I'm going to begin the reading with a poem by Kim Shook called When We Are a River. Down 101 through the Central Coast, oak branch scrawl keeps up the conversation. Rock faces, hillsides chime in, earth marks for navigation. Language is a substance of place, vibration of weather, creak of growth, seep of dirt, crows, ravens, rhyme and sift, creek beds howl, story from elsewhere, shifts rock, asphalt, renames, trade paths become freeways, songs mix in complicated patterns. So I think we are ready to begin our reading. And just to remind people, we feel like lending our voice collectively to these readings is a way of reinforcing the idea that none of us are experts here. We reserve this time to learn and mend together. So we're also not afraid of the silences in between. So we'll put the text up and anybody can jump in and read for as long as you feel comfortable, and then stop and somebody else just jump in. But before we do, maybe I'd like to introduce Douglas Lee, who's reading. We're sharing today. Douglas is a sound artist and longtime co-creator at Metabolic Studio, who has facilitated a lot of the work we do in supporting the web of life, especially where it's been ground down to almost an inert halt. We come from a place in the Kabbalistic tradition, which comes with the idea that in the beginning was a word, and the word is the unknowable. So we take that to mean that word, to make any word involves breath. and to have any breath involves vibration. So the idea that vibration is the beginning of life as we know it, and the idea of word as the stand-in for sound is sort of where we begin. So with that prompt, Doug, would you like to introduce today and yourself?
Absolutely. Can everybody hear me okay? My name is Douglas Lee. It's all true what Lauren said, and I've been working with the studio now for a number of years, and it's my distinct honor and privilege to do so. This week in Learning Mending, we will explore the sonic world of environmental soundscape research, also known as soundscape ecology or acoustic ecology. This is the study of the sounds produced by biological organisms, geologic phenomena, and human activity, how these differing types of sounds interact with each other, and the unintended effects of human-made artificial sounds on an ecosystem. Metabolic Studio Sonic Division is working with FarmLab to regenerate brownfields and support the life web. When the life web's abundance is audible, it has agency in creating well-being. We collect rain from the rooftops of buildings on this site at this Metabolic Studio and store that water in standard water tanks. Because we don't get much rain in Southern California, we aim to keep bacteria from forming in stored water by running sound through the tanks. Our work covers the Cyborg watershed of the Los Angeles Aqueduct, a 240-mile network of open channels, siphons, dams, conduits, and roads that redirect the snowmelt from the Sierra Nevada mountains to Los Angeles. Our practice is engaging with 3 post-industrial sites, 2 on either side of the LA River on Tongva land, and 1 on the shores of the Owens Dry Lake in Payahanatu. Sound has the agency to shift energy, allows us to think beyond useless boundaries that divide and control the commons of water, forest, desert, soil, atmosphere, and offers the community that is connected by this cyborg watershed. In today's Learning and Mending, we will read selections from 2 books by soundscape ecologist Bernie Krause, Wild Soundscapes and The Great Animal Orchestra are the titles of these 2 books. We chose these pages because they are focused on the appreciation of sonics as a field of inquiry in general. Since many people might not regard soundscapes as having any real importance in the world, we thought these pages would be a good introduction into the idea that ambient natural sounds have value in nature and society. Sound is obviously a vital method of communication within nature, but also it can be a tool used to measure the health of an ecosystem. And with this information, we can possibly offset some of the negative effects human sound can have on a landscape. We will also read a section from Aldo Farina's book entitled Soundscape Ecology, breaking down the taxonomy of different types of sounds in the world. This classification system can be used to better understand what sounds are beneficial to an ecosystem and which sounds are not. After that, we will offer a poetic reading from noted soundscape composer and author R. Murray Schafer and his very popular book, The Natural Soundscape, Tuning of the World, about the first possible sounds we are introduced to as individuals within the world and the human race at large, the sound of water in the womb and the sound of oceans and rivers. And finally, we will read from artist and author Salome Vogelin's book, Listening to Noise in Silence. In a society overwhelmed by human-generated sounds, the silence of the world has essentially vanished. In order to appreciate and respect natural soundscapes, one needs to appreciate silence. Healthy soundscapes and silence are in a symbiotic relationship, and one cannot exist without the other. Silence allows natural soundscapes to be heard, and silence also promotes intelligent listening. And with that, I think we can begin our reading. I will apologize if the literature is a little messy visually, but I promise if we have a learning and mending about editing a PDF in Acrobat, somebody else can organize that, and I will step aside. So with that, I'm not sure if Millie, did you want to say a couple things beforehand? Or...
Yeah, right. Just before we start reading, I just wanted to pose some guiding questions for a casual dialogue after we conclude reading. Number one guiding question for tonight is, building soundscapes is an experience involving interspecies needs. How may we begin to imagine soundscape as an infrastructure? 2, how can the building of an infrastructure be harmonious with the existing geophonics and biophonics of a given space? Now, those 2 words are going to be defined while we're reading, so hold on. 3, what role does active listening play in constructing sound? 4, is organizing sounds in itself a building infrastructure? How far can our notion of infrastructure stretch? Now, should you not feel comfortable having a conversation or a dialogue after we finish reading, feel free to use the chat bar to add your questions, thoughts, resources, or any feedback that you may have for us. Also note, anything added to the chat bar will be included on our Discord Water Community Power. My colleague Matt, who you met earlier today, will now be adding the Discord link to our chat bar. The Discord has been established to continue these dialogues and to open source our collective knowledge. So, without further ado, Stefano, would you be so kind to share the book tonight? Thank you.
Thank you, Millie. Okay, I'm gonna be sharing my screen, and please let me know if it doesn't look properly. Thank you.
The mystery of sound. With the sense of sight, the idea communicates the emotion, whereas with sound, the emotion communicates the idea, which is more direct and therefore more powerful. Alfred North Whitehead. Of all human senses, hearing is the most mysterious. R. Murray Schafer once wrote, I have never seen a sound because sound is so elusive. It has relatively little worth in this culture. What is the value of the original Mona Lisa compared with a performance of Bach Prelude, where one object can be held in the hand and the other cannot? And although we can experience acoustic signals, they are nearly impossible to define. Yet, what we hear in wild places is not only fascinating and immeasurably rich in detail, but absolutely vital to our lives and to our survival. Nothing can replace it.
The ear is a magical receptor capable of processing far more complex information than we had ever thought possible. Through the operation of the ear and the brain together, we are linked to information we may never fully comprehend. Nevertheless, we must keep in mind that every natural soundscape is a proto-symphony that reveals a detailed and powerful narrative across a very wide range of disciplines. Now it is time to decipher it. The mystery of sound. Sound, because is so intimate, immediate, and physical, is probably the most influential of our senses. If loud and persistent enough and of a certain quality in a given space, it can actually cause the temperature there to rise. Think Think of all the knowledge and emotion communicated through the medium of sound. It can inform or elevate us, make us feel sad, inspired, or soothe. It can terrify us, as in the sound of water or a natural disaster, or it can create in us a sense of serenity and evoke a wide range of mental images. Sound is also key to much of our entertainment. Try watching Star Wars with the soundtrack turned off. That is what you would actually hear in space, nothing. But complete silence makes us feel utterly uncomfortable and disoriented. Imagine a world without Bach or Beethoven, Lightning Hopkins, or Miles Davis, or Peter Gabriel. However, the use of loud sound designed to create excitement or suspense, or to represent action and drama, often leads to such acoustic agony in some quarters that even the loudest wild creature's voice is drowned out. We are even learning that some sounds, such as prolonged loud and distorted noise, can actually cause serious illness and in some cases, even death. On the other hand, it is encouraging to note that a growing body of research is now being done on sound that heal.
What is sound? Sound is a sensation that comes from electrical signals in our nervous system's auditory center. But this is not where the sense begins. A movement, whether a beating wing or the vibration of skin on a drum head, produces pressure waves in the air molecules around it. These waves then travel through the air at high enough rate, frequency, and at high enough level, amplitude or loudness, for our ears to detect. Our ears translate the waves once received into impression. The extraordinary and complex mechanism of the human ear allow us to discriminate between extremely fine details in the texture of sound. Even many of us with some hearing impairment can distinguish the sounds of one human voice from another, just as we have the innate ability to distinguish between individual human voices. We also possess a latent aptitude that allows us to hear patterns among less familiar voices, such as those expressed in the natural world. These creature voices define the status of habitats within certain environments and can provide new insight into our experience of the wild. As civilization has become industrialized, it has effectively dismissed the ability to hear the natural soundscapes in discriminating ways. We are now a visual culture, informed largely by what we see. The focus of this book is to learn, once again, to use our auditory gifts in conscious ways more balanced with the rest of our senses. It is a process of discovery, both wonderfully informative and a joy to encounter.
Two types of sound, desirable and undesirable sounds, are differentiated in the field of bioacoustics as those that convey useful information as opposed to noise. We're often not mindful of the noise that surrounds us. What the author Joachim Ernst Berendt refers to in his book, The Third Ear, as acoustic garbage, when hearing with our ears alone. Yet our brains are at work filtering out undesirable sounds so that we can better hear and process what is beneficial or useful, information that we might need to have. We have all had the experience of attempting to talk with a companion in a noisy restaurant or on a crowded urban street. As we gaze at the source of the sound, we think we are hearing everything perfectly. However, our hearing is aided mostly by what we see. In our auditory centers, we are receiving many sounds, but our brains are at work filtering the background noise and making us think that the background interference doesn't matter. This activity goes on whether or not we are fully conscious of it, but we are simultaneously subjected to varying degrees of measurable fatigue and stress, even as our attention is focused on what we see, with our brains functioning overtime to retrieve and process the desired information.
Some businesses manipulate this process in order to trigger or reduce human stress levels. Restaurant architects and interior designers, for example, plan restaurant environments to be more or less stressful. There's a practical reason. By introducing hard, reverberant surfaces that reflect and amplify the slightest sound, they can create a noisier space. The noise triggers stress and fatigue responses that encourage quick patron turnover, resulting in higher profits for the restaurateur. Consider how relaxed you feel in a quiet eating establishment, with lots of sound absorbent material factored into the design, and how less likely you are to hurry out. The New York Times discussed the problem of restaurant noise in a number of editorials several years ago. Subsequently, it began to report noise levels as part of its regular restaurant reviews to give readers appealing and quiet options. The San Francisco Chronicle places small bell icons in restaurant reviews to identify restaurants' noise levels. And many other newspaper and magazine food critics follow similar models. Human impact on biophony. Since 1984, I have been listening to and recording spadefoot toads, Spea intermontana, around Mono Lake, just east of Yosemite National Park. What is so splendid about toad chorusing, the way one critter begins and others soon join in. After a while, they all join together in a way that forms synchronicity of sound that absolutely engulfs and hypnotizes you. A couple of years ago, I was able to capture a direct correlation between human-induced disturbances in the toads and their defensive response. The incident involved a low-flying military jet over the Mono Lake Basin in April 1993, one evening while my wife and I were camping and recording.
Many types of frogs and toads tend to vocalize together, so no individual stands out among the many, which functions as a kind of acoustic camouflage. This chorusing creates a protective audio performance that confuses predators and keeps them from locating any single point from which an organism vocalizes it. The frog boys emanate from so many places at once and are so much in sync that they appear to be coming from everywhere. When a loud noise such as a jet plane flying overhead disturbs the amphitheater, the special frog choral synchronicity is broken. While they attempt to reestablish the unified rhythm and chorus, individual frogs momentarily stand out. This gives predators like coyotes, foxes, and owls a perfect opportunity to snag a meal. In this case, as the flyover is occurring, the number of creatures vocalizing declines, and there are breaks in synchronicity at approximately 2.5, 3.5, and 4.5 figures. After the jet disappeared, 45 minutes passed before the toads were able to reestablish their full course. During that time, under a full moon, we watched as 2 coyotes and a great horde of owls began feeding by the side of the small pond. Because of the unique manner in which we record and measure sound, we have discovered that the relatively intense noise produced by low-flying jet aircraft can cause changes in the biophone.
3 sources of the sonic environment. The soundscape is the result of the mixture of different and concurring sounds. According to the source of each of such sounds, it is possible to distinguish a geophonic component, a biophonic component, and an anthrophonic component. We refer to a physical dimension of the soundscape as a first descriptive approach, and this represents the more simplified and objective classification of a soundscape. The distinction is particularly useful, especially when we intend to explore the relationship between soundscape patterns, sonic patches or sonotopes, and landscape configurations. Geophonies. The geophonies are represented by all sounds produced by the non-biological natural agents such as winds, volcanoes, sea waves, running water, rain, thunderstorms, lightning, avalanches, earthquakes, and floods, and represents the sonic background with which other sounds can overlap, mix, or mask. The geophonies are strongly affected by the geomorphic trait of a region, steepness, exposition, etc., and by climatic conditions and local weather. The morphology of a region, the presence of valleys, canyons, ridges, and cliffs determines the different propagation of sounds, strongly affecting the sonic degradation. Breeze regime, air humidity, and temperature affect the propagation patterns of sound waves. In the water environment, depth, salinity, and temperature are important drivers of the sonic processes. Biophonies. The biophonies are defined as the emerging non-human sound produced by living organisms in a given biome. Every biome, and inside the biomes, every landscape patch, ecotopes, have distinct biophonies. The temperate terrestrial biomes, the majority of biophonies are produced by birds, frogs, insects, and mammals. In tropical regions, insects and frogs dominate, followed by birds and mammals. In the freshwater environment, insects and fishes are important components. In shallow seawater, crustaceans are the dominant musicians. But in deep sea waters, whales, dolphins, and killer whales, orcas, are the most frequent biophonic sources. Although not included by Krauss, human voices must be considered to pertain to the biophonies. The complexity and plasticity of such acoustic expression known as voice is a human peculiarity. Biophonies have a different pattern according to latitude, season, and hours of the day. In fact, vocal animals are more active during the day in particular hours. Example, birds and frogs perform choruses at dawn and dusk, and at dusk, varying with the seasons. Example, birds are acoustically active in springtime and according to latitude. Example, in intertropical regions, birds are acoustically active at all times, but are silent outside the breeding season at high latitudes. In subtropical regions, seasonal invariance reduces the seasonal effect, whereas the effects of seasonal changes are maximal in boreal and polar regions. This reasoning can be applied to terrestrial biomes. In marine biomes, other factors are concurrent, such as currents, light penetration, sea depth, and water transparency. The long-term fluctuation of vocal activity can be expected according to the changes in phenological cycles under climatic changes. The acoustic activity of animals is finalized to communicate actively or passively with other intra and interspecific individuals for several reasons and functions. Well, sure, why not? This phenomena activates communicative channels that concur to the acoustic complexity that we can hear around us. The apparent complexity of the acoustic communication largely depends on factors such as species-specific acoustic performance, population density, number of species composing the local aggregation community, time of day and season, and finally by the typology of the vegetational cover, biomes, and ecoregions. All these factors are strongly affected by geographic positioning along the parallels.
With the use of digital technology, the expansion of magnetic memory, and highly sophisticated microphones and amplifiers assembled into programmable devices for long-time autonomous in terms of power supply operation, the recording of soundscapes has made a leap forward during the last decennia. Despite these tremendous improvements, however, until now, there have not been processes able to identify automatically every type of sound. This limitation poses problems in the identification of the components of the soundscape and largely reduces the possibility of efficient evaluation of the potentialities expressed in distinct sites. At the moment, it is not possible to identify all the species that compose the soundscape, but nevertheless, new approaches are available. Acoustic diversity, expressed in terms of frequencies, became an important matter of investigation and of estimation of the complexity that we can expect in a specific site or habitat. Acoustic diversity cannot be correlated with biological diversity, at least in birds, but nevertheless, a high acoustic diversity is associated with specific assemblage of species. In fact, species such as birds that have special organ, the syrinx, to produce sounds are able to produce a great variety of sounds. Biophonies present different dynamics according to the temporal scale of resolution. Observations of a breeding colony of European starlings at the University Farm, Witham, Oxfordshire, United Kingdom, by Wright and Cott in 1994, have demonstrated the alternation of singing momentum with feeding activity at the ground. This alternation occurring twice per hour, but as egg laying time approached, the majority of birds spent their time close to the breeding colony. Along a gradient of increased human intrusion from intact natural landscapes to rural landscapes and to urban landscapes, geophonies seem to not be affected. Biophonies show a clear decrease, and finally, anthrophonies. This behavior decreased in sharpness and intensity later in the season when breeding behavior was more demanding. The switch between episodes of feeding and singing was less definite as the breeding season advanced. Singing time at the breeding stage represents a way to affirm social cohesion and to transmit a focused message to the females. Anthrophonies. The anthrophonies are the result of the movements of artificial devices, such as cars, train, airplanes, industrial machinery, and bells. This component of the soundscape is becoming intrusive and dominant in large parts of the earth, associated with urban development and globalized trade. Anthrophonies are the major cause of noise pollution, a phenomenon that has revealed dangerous consequences to all organisms and to human health also, producing relevant modifications of behavior in both human and non-human. In humans, high levels of noise can cause annoyance and aggression, hypertension, hearing loss, additional stress, tinnitus, hearing loss, sleep disturbance, etc. Long-term exposure to high levels of noise can contribute to cardiovascular pathology and to an increment in blood pressure. In chapter 5 and 6 are presented more details about the characteristics and consequences of exposure to noise.
Anthrophony.
Go ahead.
Anthrophonies increase in importance, moving toward urban areas and close to industrial and transport infrastructures, such as highways, airports, and air corridors. Anthrophonies change according to the different structure and function of cities in the social and economic context. A sonic gradient across a city is intercepted by the economic values of houses, fixing their price. Different crooks. I find it ironic that I am writing a book about something that our ancestors knew intuitively, something that would have been a fundamental part of the fabric of their lives and that needed no explanation. Early humans would have had an intimate relationship with their soundscapes. They would have learned to read the biophony for essential information. Their music would have been an intricate, multi-layered transformation of the sounds they were immersed in. The local creature life as a collective, as well as the sounds of the landscape. Our music always reflects our influences, our background, education, culture, and links to the environment in which we surround ourselves. Yet when composers of the past 3 centuries or so promoted their works as being connected to nature, our own idealized version of nature was reflected back to us in a narrowly closed loop. Mostly, it consisted of single voices picked for how each might be incorporated in our compositions in a predetermined way. Nothing but faint echoes of the wild. How did our music become so detached from nature? Is anyone making music today that reflects our deep ancestral links to the wild? And how would our music sound if we could somehow harness all the experience and technologies we possess and find a way to reconnect once again with the non-human creature world for one brief moment?
The natural soundscape. Voices of the sea. What was the first sound heard? It was the caress of the waters. Proust called the sea the plaintive ancestress of the earth pursuing, as in the days when no living creature existed, its lunatic, immemorial agitation. The Greek myths tell how man arose from the sea. Some say that all gods and all living creatures originated in the stream of Oceanus, which girdles the world, and that Tethys was the mother of all his children. The ocean of our ancestors is reproduced in the watery womb of our mother and is chemically related to it, ocean and mother. In the dark liquid of ocean, the relentless masses of water pushed past the first sonar ear, and the ear of the fetus turns in its amniotic fluid. As the ear of the fetus turns in its amniotic fluid, it too is tuned to the lap and gurgle of water. At first it is the submarine resonance of the sea, not yet the splash of wave, but then the waters, little by little, began to move, and at the movement of the waters, the great fish and the scaly creatures were disturbed, and the waves began to roll in double breakers, and the beings that dwell in the waters were seized with fear, and as the breakers rushed together in pairs, the roar of the ocean grew loud, and the spray was lashed into fury, and garlands of foam arose, and the great ocean opened to its depths, and the waters rushed hither and thither, the furious crests of their waves meeting this way and that.
Waves whipped into surf, pelting the first rocks as the amphibian ascends from the sea. And although he may occasionally turn his back on the waves, he will never escape their atavistic charm. Quote, "The wise man delights in water," says Lao Tzu. "The roads of man all lead to water. It is the fundamental of the original soundscape, and the sound with which all others gives us the most delight in its myriad transformations.
When there is nothing to hear, so much starts to sound. Silence is not the absence of sound, but the beginning of listening. This is listening as a generative process, not of noises external to me, but from inside, from the body, where my subjectivity is at the center of the sound production, audible to myself. Silence reveals to me my own sounds. My head, my stomach, my body becomes their conductor. This is not John Cage's anechoic chamber, where the vacuum denies external sounds a path to the ear, and the sounds of blood pumping through the body and the tingling of the nervous system starts to be audible. Instead, here, the external sounds are so small, embalmed in the white silence of snow, that they come to play with my body, close up and intimate. The rumbling of my stomach becomes the gurgling of the gurgling of the water pipes. My breathing relates to the humming of the house. Inside and out take on equivalence. The muffled outside soundscape morphs with my inner soundings. I become the soundscape in me and from me. The explosive centrifugality of noise finds a centripetal motion to match. Silence occupies their undulation. Silence is possibly the most lucid moment of one's experiential production of sound. In silence, I comprehend physically the idea of intersubjective listening. I am the soundscape through my listening to it, and in turn, the soundscape is what I listen to. Perpetually in the present. Silence confirms the soundscape as a sonic life world and clarifies the notion that sound is a relationship not between things, but just a relationship passing through my ears. The quiet sounds do not belong to a visual source. They sound out of silence, the being of the house, and myself as being within it. I cannot encounter them vis-a-vis myself, but only through myself. Their autonomy is not spatial, distance, but aesthetic. The sound of autonomy, they sound the autonomy of the aesthetic moment. In silence, the visual perspective vanishes into sensorial simultaneity. The sound field is compact, but potentially infinite. The tiny sounds the tiny sounds are close up and real, to the point of being hyperreal, shiny and sharp, quasi-tangible, heard through the surface of my skin. They do not represent the real, but they produce a reality all of their own. This hyper-reality is local to my body wherever I am listening. It calibrates the little sounds on my flesh. Silence is everywhere near, and I am in that abundant silence, all it sounds. In its hushed nothingness, I am the simultaneity of listening and sound making. After the whirlwind fragmentation of noise, I am an open sonic subject, ready to reciprocate sound with my fleshy body and to practice myself in that relationship. I am a sensible thing, thinging in the midst of sonic things, thinging with silence, thinging with me in silence.
This perspectivelessness is the basis of all sound, but for the most part, it is masked by the ordering facility of the eye and visual expectations with which we orient ourselves in a noisier environment and which take the listener away from his complicit relationship with the soundscape into the illumination of visual comprehension. Perspective is not a sonic, but a visual trait. It organizes and hierarchizes what I perceive. Sound, by contrast, enjoys the obscurity of nonsense and celebrates the simultaneity of hearing. Listening organizes not the source, but sound itself, not through a dialectical differentiation, but in a cumulative fashion, immersing me in ephemeral buildings construction I am part of. Silence emphasizes this fleeting simultaneity of listening. It brings me back to the aesthetic moment of sound, its autonomy, where its materiality is exposed to the ears in an acute way without offering a visual referent, and where my hearing is linked directly to its production rather than guided by an extrasonic point of reference. Sounds in silence are what I hear.
Listening to noise and silence. Noise goes toward language from the sensibility of isolation without reaching its infrastructure of meaning. It remains nonsense, sensate sense, contingent, passing and discrete. What we share in noise is a desire to communicate, not, however, the system of speaking. We meet in the dark, back to back, and know each other as sensible, reciprocally constituted in our bodily fantasy. Noise is there before language, when we try each other in the trial of ourselves on the way to a contingent and passing self that passes others of the same temporary constitution. It is the necessary basis of language as the desire to speak, not, however, its lexis. Silence provides the condition to build understanding from within the compact materiality of sound, to produce a passing vocabulary from the dense quietness of this intersubjective life world. However, silence's path towards communication does not demonstrate an opposition to noise. Rather, it arises out of noise, sensitive solitude, and its acute and bodily understanding of one responsibility towards any exchange, chief among which is the responsibility to suspend all habits or thoughts that shroud the practice of listening. In many ways, noise is concealed silence rather than its opposite. It compels the listener to develop the sonic sensibility that silence demands to be heard. On the other side of noise, silence promotes listening as a way toward language, not to fragment, but to hear the fragments fragmenting. It works from the signifying practice of nonsense towards communication, not to abandon and deny the individual's acoustic reality in a noisy life world, as was discussed in the previous part, but to try its passing and contingent listener in a collective exchange, working from the intense isolation of noise back into language. The sonic subject in silence is sensitive to the fragility of his belonging and knows that he deals in misunderstandings that meet in occasional and fleeting moments of shared meaning, rather than with an a priori language base to make his point. Silence is not the language base, but a basis for language to develop as a contingent and passive mode of exchange.
Thank you to all who read and listened tonight and also mended along. Just wanted to summarize tonight's reading and then we'll pass it on to Mish for the guiding questions. So in the readings for today, we explored how industrialization has altered the way sound moves through the world. Industrialization has ruptured geophonies. Thanks for giving me those words, Doug. That's great words. Geophonies and biophonies, which have their own spontaneity and organization. Building soundscapes is an experience of interspecies beings. Mish, will you now repeat and post the guiding questions on our chat bar, please?
Absolutely. So the guiding questions are almost at the top of the chat bar. I'm going to read them to you. At any time, feel comfortable answering directly in the chat bar if it's easier for you, or later in the breakout room. So the question number one is, building soundscape is an experience involving interspecies beings. How may we begin to imagine soundscape as infrastructure? Number two is, how can the building of infrastructure be harmonious with the existing geophonics and biophonics of a given space? The third one is, what role does active listening play in constructing sound? And finally, is organizing sound in itself a building of infrastructure? How far can our notion of infrastructure stretch?
Thank you, Michelle. And now I will send you all into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes where you can discuss the guiding questions and the reading tonight. And then we will pull you back into the main room at the 10-minute mark, and we'll continue on from there. Enjoy.
Are the questions in the chat room?
I will post them. I'll see if I can do a broadcast post for you.
That'd be great.
Of course.
They're so good. They're so good.
I'll work on that and send it to you in 1 second.
Yeah, of course, of course. Take your time.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I believe everyone should be joining shortly, and we can continue the discussion here.
Our 10-minute mark is very funny. We tend to get completely cut off mid-sentence, but I wanted to, jump in with a bit of a clarification about, at least from my perspective, about putting the these readings about sound in a learning and mending syllabus about post-human infrastructure, because what we're trying to consider here is that we usually think of infrastructure as the underground networks or the spatial networks that allow us to communicate, that allow us to have energy grids, power grids, water supplies. But all of this often doesn't take into consideration that other than human changes that these infrastructures exact. So with a post-human infrastructure syllabus, we're asking us to think about what kinds of reparations would we need to make if we were thinking about the complex series of confusions that are put into place by the sonic landscape of our infrastructures, and how it complicates and confuses all kinds of other than human beings. So, on a fundamental level, this is a kind of consciousness of exercise that the infrastructural grids that we have really been organized around us to almost complete without consideration of other things, like perhaps the disappearance of bees has something to do with the sonic landscapes of power lines or, you know, these kinds of other things. So I wanted to at least sort of finish that thought that was in our particular breakout room to hopefully make it clear, more clear about why we have this particular session in our post-human infrastructure lineup.
And if anyone else wants to pitch in what you guys talked about within your groups, we have about 5 minutes to share at the moment.
Well, just to the idea of ameliorating some of the mess, a whimsical thought appeared in my mind, which is in the same way that they have like bridges over freeways and things for traveling, that perhaps those big sonic reflective dishes could help bird communication happen, where it could amplify it in some way. Like if there's a mating call, the other bird will hear somehow.
When I started to do habitat restoration or trying to rehabilitate lands with FarmLab and Metabolics, I realized how daunting the work was, not with the soil, but the acoustic. I mean, how can one change the acoustic of two overpassing bridges and 3 train tracks and metro? And I think that's probably the part that's neglected. This is probably the daunting part in changing the ecosystem, the acoustic notion of it. And I think I cannot believe how Lauren started to think about those notions. And it took me a while before oh, wait a minute, I hear frogs and I hear sounds here and there throughout the studio and outside. And I think I was so tuned out of the acoustic and aspect of the land, but it really took me a while before even comprehending this notion. I was so much my nose in the soil and understanding nature by the landscape, but it took me a while to appreciate this dimension.
We discussed sound and communication birds in our group too. And it was interesting that I was telling our group how my neighbor shared with me that there's these string of black crows, and she was like freaked out by them. She said they come every morning and she feels like they're coming to bear bad news. And I didn't really notice it until she said it. And so I was sitting out on my patio, and sure enough, one would come and start, and then the other one would come and start. And then before you know it, the light pole, across the lights, they were full. And I didn't really take it as they were bringing bad news. I just kind of took it as, you know, it's a line of communication. And it was just interesting because I never really paid attention to it until she said something. And we were also was discussing a sound of Jasmine. Did you share it in the link? But you got cut off, and I was like, I really wanted to hear that last part. I think she put it in the chat.
Yeah. Will you share a little bit with us?
Sure. I brought up this site called Göbekli Tepe that's in modern day Turkey, and it's like one of the most ancient human created architectural sites today. And the way that it was built, it's like these big limestone pillars that are situated on ground where there's like a natural vibration, like frequency. And if you strike the pillar in a certain way, it makes really loud sound, and it makes the other pillars like sympathetically vibrate with the one that was struck. And so it was considered like a spiritual gathering place, and is in the area where like wheat was first domesticated So there are like theories that like because so many people gathered there for spiritual reasons that like they needed more food and they couldn't gather all the food, so they started to domesticate food. So this is really interesting interwoven history that I find really fascinating.
Thanks for sharing. Anyone else?
I'll just jump in real fast on a bit of an obvious point, but I still think it's totally radical, which is the idea that, I mean, it's kind of what we've been it's just the idea of the evening, which is that natural soundscapes are an infrastructure in and of itself, and if it can be recognized as an infrastructure, then at least you've got a place to begin, right? I think right now we are in a world where we don't even recognize the value of of a soundscape. I mean it's super easy. Okay, we build a road and we moved it around so it didn't hit the trees, so we've got the trees and we got the road. Hey, great, everybody wins. But of course, this is what we were talking about in the group a little bit, was that if it's a place that no animals will go because they can't be heard, and their calls, whether they be in defense or mating or whatnot, simply can't get through the din of the human activity, those areas will not be populated by animals. I think of like the freeway overpass that they're building here in Los Angeles. That's an animal crossing. Wonderful idea. It's an animal crossing so they can get across, a nice grass crossing across the freeway. But of course, there's going to be certain animals that will never go near that thing just because of the sound that the freeway is making. That, okay, you put a crossing, wonderful. We've got a way for, in theory, mountain lions and stuff. Probably mountain lions are probably fine with it, but some of the smaller creatures that are just, I should have formed this thought a little better. But anyhow, I think just sound, the soundscape as an infrastructure in and of itself, separate from everything, just as much as the infrastructure of Yosemite National Parks needs to maintain trees in order to maintain its natural feeling. You need to accommodate sound in this way. So and how do you do that? Is it with no fly zones over national parks or no motorized vehicles? Who knows? But some of these considerations, and Michel linked to a very, very interesting article about law in France. He might even be able to talk to it better than I can right now, where it let's see, preserves countryside sensory heritage. So you can't do anything that will disrupt the sounds of the countryside in France. I think we're getting into the human-made sounds a little bit, but it's still a decent start and probably a great article worth reading.
I just wanted to share very quickly, this really reminds me when we walked the 240 miles with 100 mules, and when we arrived in an urban environment, how the mules really retracted. They didn't want to cross certain bridges. They didn't want to cross the the railroads. They were just very specific and very sensitive to sound.
And so are we. The experience of the sort of synthesis of or the connection that we had after a month of riding a mule through the desert, and the cadence of that when you approached a megalopolis like Los Angeles was very disassociative. Like we had a hard time, all of us, connecting to where we were physically in time and space. And I think that's a great example, Millie, of how much we live with the infrastructure of sound that we're not aware that we're fighting against, the consciousness that comes from not having to fight against the sound waves that go with our infrastructure grids.
And it used to be kind of just like metaphysical, but now there's all these neuroscientists that are proving how sound bowls actually heal. So we have the condition that we have an ecosystem that is quite complex and beautiful. Then humans come. And now we're all aware with data, it's no longer metaphysics, that it affects the way we communicate, the way we heal, it affects who we are. So I guess that's why this is what are we gonna do? So now that we know all these realities with hard data, and I think that's technology could offer an opportunity. And it always reminds me how the Greeks said there were 4 disciplines: geometry, music, astrology, and math. And music was invented to mimic nature, and the math, the formulas of math, was to imitate those. So I appreciate this conversation so much.
I wanted to share a quick thought about harmony, because I feel like the conversation is highly focused on this like experiential nature of sound, which has all these ramifications in the world, but intellectually or theoretically, like the concept of harmony is like resonance of frequencies. You know, in the poem at the beginning of the class, we started in this abstract space. So the ideal space of harmony as resonant frequencies, like a proportion of frequencies. So those wavelengths are aligning to each other. And in space with proportionate, like space, everything can align to each other. So there's this like alignment. I feel like there's this fundamental concept of alignment that happens in harmony, in sound, and alignment in space. And when those alignments happen, is that, you know, that's when the animals aren't scared, that's when people are at peace. And it happens spatially and sound waves also, like simultaneously. So I don't know, I've just been thinking about that the whole class, this depth to the concept of alignment.
Well, thank you so much, everyone who read, who participated, who shared their stories tonight. I'm considerate of the time, and I know many of us are probably hungry or want to go on with our evening, but wanted to close out by very excited to introduce next week's reading. My colleague from Farm Lab, Lee Adams, will be our guest next week, and she will be introducing the original engineer, the beaver. And so please stay tuned and come back and enjoy a reading with my amazing colleague, Lee Adams, and continue just to check in. You can get the Eventbrite via social media and whatnot. But before we go out, I'd love to have Stefano share the Beaver of the Week video.
For sure.
Ready?
It's a video of a beaver in a river in Canada. And it's 4 minutes long and is pretty cute. So I'm going to share.
Oh my God, cuteness.
I love the idea, Millie, of Beaver of the Week. That's definitely a keeper.
Oh, this beaver.
This is what's been missing is Beaver of the Week.
And now I was like, Beaver of the Week. We have those. That's awesome.
So cute. Oh my God.
Oh, they're awesome.
Thanks, Jack. Have a good night.
Oh,
That's so cute.
look at him.
I imagine you have sound, you're just not sharing the sound.
Captain, are you sharing the sound?
Sorry. Do you hear it now?
Yeah. Not so good. I think you have to go and press under when you share video. There's a function for sharing sound for video. There we go.
Yeah. Sorry about it.
That's okay.
I found this guy that he has a whole playlist with Beaver footage on.
Fantastic.
Academy Award.
He's so chubby.
They're doing such great work with beavers. I was just watching a documentary, I think on PBS recently, of how they're actually bringing trees and landscapes back in. Not even that difficult. See if I can find it again. Pretty amazing.
Thank you, Stefano. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye now.
Have a good night. Good night.
Good night.
Hi, Marcela.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.